The Essence Festival Durban Business Conference recently took place at the Durban International Convention Centre. Government and business leaders from around the world gathered in a combined effort to promote a radical economic transformation. Her Worship Mayor of the eThekwini municipality, Zandile Gumede, kicked off the proceedings with the opening remarks.
As we kickstart the much-awaited Essence Festival Week, this week is promising to be fulfilling in more ways than one. One such way is the sharing of information between small and business and their more established counterparts. The reason we have Essence in Durban is because of sister city partnership with our city of New Orleans in US. This festival is about cultural exchanges through creative arts, and it is also about knowledge exchange on how to develop small businesses. As a result of that partnership, the city of Durban decided to consolidate that partnership with sister city of Orleans by identifying other platforms that could be of mutual benefit in terms of cultural exchange.
MEC for Economic Development and Environmental Affairs for KZN, Sihle Zikhala, took to the stage to give his views on the topic Radical Economic Transformation Agenda. In his speech, he said South Africa has come a long way, but a lot more needs to be done.
A scenario of two economies persists, with the formal economy in the hands of the few and the informal economy distributed amongst the majority of the country. Thus, more than 15 years, we've made a lot and notched success in terms of ensuring legislative frameworks that allow economic growth and distribution. We focus on issues of empowerment, focus on issues of affirmative action, as well as redistribution and redress. However, it is clear that the pace of transformation has not reached a desired level. And that is why in 2012, we decided to adopt the program of radical economic transformation as our Lord Star, because it must decisively have, one, ensure that there is a political commitment, but two, a legislative framework, and lastly, a financial support to ensure that those who are at the periphery of the mainstream economy are included.
During the conference, a number of panel discussions took place, including one on sustainable economic growth and wealth redistribution. Panelists from South Africa and the United States shared stories of economic transformation.
I think there are major opportunities for us to just look and correlate between US and South Africa. And let me just start off by giving a view of where we are in terms of our economic conditions in South Africa. We all are sitting here in Durban, but the sum of the parts is really the entire country. And as a country, we are operating under the most severe economic conditions currently. Very low GDP growth, commodity prices are very heavily subdued. The environment to operate in is just very challenging. Yet at the same time, we are here to talk about how we move forward and how we actually sustain growth, take it above, just under 1%, and really look at fundamental changes in our system to look at wealth redistribution. And frankly, whilst we look at the US as a country, if you just look at the generic features of a country, both countries, are people who are either marginalized on the one hand and on the other are the majority, and yet we experience the same fundamental issues of really sitting on the outside and trying to penetrate this main economy. And my colleagues here from the US, I hope, can help us understand how we begin to do that on a day-to-day basis. In South Africa, one of the biggest challenges, and I talk from an entrepreneurial perspective, I've been an entrepreneur for 23 years, long before policies of BEE even existed, long before the idea that because of a particular gender, you're particularly sought out and looked for to partner. And the reality around this, Gugu, really is that as a country, if you look at the policies that are in place, such as triple BEE, such as Black Industrialist Policy, and a whole lot of others that were mentioned by Mr. Manyu earlier, these are the real agents of change and of movement that we require in a very difficult economic environment. And I think we can unpack those one by one as we begin to hear from one another.
Well, that's certainly what we intend to do, and I'm glad that you mentioned the element of policies, because as we know, we have representatives on stage, and Aubrey, perhaps I'd like to direct this question to you, because so often we tend to focus that it starts with government. It starts with a policy, and how the policy is then implemented and translated into the private sector. Given your experience in trying to influence the mark in California in particular, is that the place to start? And more importantly so, how best do we ensure that these do result in tangible output of transformation which can be felt by individuals on the ground?
Well, the simple and most direct response is that if a person or persons don't do that, what you want done, vote them out. But one of the things that has occurred, and I hear maybe that's occurring here because I know it has occurred in America. A lot of African Americans that I can speak for, we went through a metamorphosis, if I could put it that way, which you're on the front end of a metamorphosis. And I would encourage you not to make the same mistake that we made in America.
Indulge us as to what those mistakes are.
The mistake we made in America was that we thought that our parity in the society was through politics. Our parity in society is through economics.
Absolutely.
So since, I mean, you're at the front end of it, we went through, my goodness, this is 2016. You know, we had the Black Power, resurgence of pride in being black, and all of that in the 60s. Then in the 70s, the aftershot of that was electing a lot of black officials, whether at the city level, at the state level. Obviously, we didn't get a president until just 8 years ago, but all of these intermediary government officials we thought were going to be our savior. The fact of the matter is, whether you want to admit it or not, politics comes down to economics, okay? So if you don't have the money to elect a person, then they have no obligation back to you, really. Now, they just happen to be the same color you are. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yep.
So, two things need to happen. One, either you need to just circumvent the entire political process and build your own self-sustaining economics, or get to the point that you have the kind of money individually or collectively to elect or get someone out of ordinance. So I think that's the
I want us to jump in there and
direct-
perhaps open it up as well to some of your counterparts on the panel, because again, we are comparing California in particular with South Africa, and these are very two different economies. California itself is the 6th largest economy in the world, beating countries like Italy, Brazil, and even Russia. So South Africa is a very small piece of that particular puzzle, to put things into context. However, from a numbers perspective, South Africa has a black mass. 85% versus what we see in California. How then do we get to that position where you're also dealing with a population of people who are highly unemployed in the South African context, highly unskilled in the South African context, and where perhaps we also need to develop skills for the future in order to change the mindset and over-reliance on white monopoly capital?
Well, let me just, I'd like to turn it over to some of the other panelists, but let me just address that because it really is so important, but it's not it's not one to discourage you. It doesn't matter whether in America we're 13% of the population of 300 million people, or you're 85% of the population in South Africa. The key is that regardless of the circumstances, you must find a way to empower yourself through economics. That is the linchpin of the whole conversation, to empower yourself economically. Now, by doing so, a couple things happen. One thing that does happen is, it goes without saying, your self-esteem and the way you feel about yourself greatly improves. That would encourage you to do things that you didn't think that you were capable of doing to begin with. So the dynamics from that aspect creates a situation whereby you feel totally empowered and you feel you control your own destiny. So, yeah.
I want to open it up to the panel. Ipile?
You know, when Aubrey was talking about whether you're the mass or you're the minority, we have very, very challenging situations in our country where essentially we can talk about income inequality, but our real issue is wealth inequality. And that's a fundamental issue in South Africa. And when you start to unpack wealth inequality, which is far greater than income inequality, you start to realize that 10% of our population literally own 90 to 95% of the assets that generate wealth generationally. So I will pass it on to my children, and my children will pass it on to their children. 5% of the population, in fact, the middle population, which essentially sits as about 40%, owns about 5% of those assets. And 50% of the population in South Africa generate income, but own no measurable assets. None. That's 50%. So when we talk about seriously changing that dynamic and the absolute, almost turned on its head, the absolute opposite almost to what we're experiencing with our colleagues and our friends from America, where they are the minority, looking at the sea of a majority of individuals who own assets and so forth. Ours is a very, very challenging one, because Gugu, it really speaks to radical ideas and thoughts and implementation that begin to change that outcome. And whether they be threatening or controversial, they need to be spoken about, because you cannot change that dynamic and that status quo over a period of 100 years. It won't even happen unless you actually implement real change now.
We're going for a short ad break. When we return, we explore the topics access to finance and financing opportunities, as well as promoting sustainable industrialization. Welcome back to the Essence Festival Durban Business Conference. When talking economic transformation, it's hard not to discuss access to finance. During the event, a panel discussed access to finance and the different options available to startups.
In Kenya, stock fairs are very big and they're very much business orientated. I was there a few months ago. So we need to begin to say that use this community funding model, because stock fairs are part of our community. You know, how can we actually start with the stock fairs themselves, because there are individuals within the stock fairs who are business owners themselves.
Yes.
One practical example is the taxi industry. Some people may not acknowledge that. You know, a group of people form themselves into a stock fair to buy each other a taxi, and that is business. So already there is funding. It may not be noted as formal funding, but it already exists within stock fairs. At the moment, it's largely housed internally within the stock fairs, but there's also an opportunity to take advantage of the numbers. I'll give an example of one of the stock fairs that I belong to, we went and bought a property in Kruger Park Lodge as a stokvel. So we took advantage of the numbers within our stokvels and approached a formal bank to actually give us, a loan to buy that particular property. So there's different ways of actually taking advantage of this money that already exists within the stokvels by strengthening the existing stokvels to actually strengthen each and individual member. But also, if perhaps there's no need within stokvel X, look within your community. How can you help Utogo, who is in fashion design, for example? Perhaps Umaga Togo is a member of the stokvel. Yes. Because that's one other thing that stokvel must start doing now. As members, what are the needs within our families? What are the needs within our communities? I find stokvels at the moment, they are still kind of close to their own disadvantage. They need to start opening up now to the business world.
The last panel discussion of the conference looked at promoting sustainable industrialization. A panel of experts discussed the policies in place to help grow industrialization in South Africa.
Women in the audience are saying, we want to participate, we're willing, we're energetic, we want to be the big fighters in the game. But we're not, for one reason or the other, breaking through this glass ceiling that allows us greater access to capital. If you had advice today, Cynthia, for a woman-owned business, perhaps a medium-sized woman-owned business that now really wanted to get involved in a very large transaction. We've seen women-owned entities fear, actually, going to procure huge amounts of capital. I know we often ask for too little because we're like, it's 120 million. But that's what you need, right? How do we break this glass ceiling for women-owned entities as women particularly move away from survivalist businesses and want to participate in industrialized businesses and in innovation and in technology and these big things now?
I think one of the problems is that we as women don't often see ourselves enough out there. We're conservative by nature. We always worry about maintaining something, retaining, looking after the family. I mean, it just is, I think, in the nature of women to do that. So we're hesitant to take that risk. I mean, I ache if I think over the years I've known IDC about relatively how few women are. Now, IDC is predominantly in the manufacturing space, and women, I don't know, don't we see ourselves as being in the manufacturing space? Do we always have to be in service-related industries? I'm not saying that's not where we should be, but if you look how our people train, we go into finance-related industries, we go into beauty, we go into, we become lawyers. Women can be engineers, women can manufacture things, women can make things. We do it every day of our lives in our everyday lives. So I'm saying, think big, see yourself out there and go for it. We have to take a risk and we have to move into manufacturing. It's no use us just growing the crops. I mean, we can certainly start a factory to make cereal. I'm just giving an example. I mean, that's what we should strive for. And I think collectively as a country, that's what we should try and do.
All right. Kling, you're nodding, and I feel like there's a point that is pregnantly waiting here next to me.
Yes, I think over the years I've been in the funding space, the biggest hurdle for women is access to opportunities. Because I guess, we have so many responsibilities, we never have the time to actually be where the opportunities are, So men have time to network. That's where, they hear about opportunities. This opportunity is coming up. These are the deals that are in the pipeline, and they grab them first. So what we've done at the NEF about 3 years ago, we started a fund that focuses on women, and the board said, on an annual basis, 40% of what you commit should be towards empowering women, because if we're not active about it, it's not going to happen. So now what happens at the NEF, if a group of men comes to us with an opportunity, they want our money, we'll ask them, where are the women? You know, you're employing women in these businesses, why can't you partner with them? Because we understand the profile of our society and how opportunities get out there. And if we don't advocate for women and push back to say, you can't come and ask for 50 million rand and it's all going to men. I mean, there must be women. If you can't find engineers who are women, surely you can find accountants who are women who can run the finances of your business and become shareholders in your business. So that's the first challenge you're trying to address. And the second thing is that sometimes, I always look at the experience the NEF had when we funded Luminance, Kanye's transaction. I always reflect on that and just think how sad it is, because the people who were crying foul the most were women. And I would always sit back and say, as the NEF, we've funded millions towards male-owned businesses, and we never had an outcry. And then we give a woman just 30 million rands, and the women are like, oh, you're giving Kanye and you're not giving me. So that's the issue of not also, supporting each other and saying, wow, now let me go and buy, my fancy dresses from her shop versus buying from a business that is owned by foreigners in South Africa.
What role do you think then do you play in fostering the collaboration that's going to close this gap, that's going to close these new businesses' aspiration, lack of skill and experience, with getting into these pipelines that you have effectively built and capacitated within your institutions?
I think for us, being the implementing agent of the DTI policies and what has been set by the government, is that some of the things that we are doing, not everything that we need to do, is number one, in all our projects, once we've specified the BEE codes that we want and the technical qualification that we require, one of the things that we've made sure that we institute in that is the supplier development component, where if there's a project that's a certain value, we specify that supplier development is a certain threshold. I think one of the projects that were adjudicated was about 20% of the final value of the project. If a major company is not able to do or meet that supplier development component, then that project falls aside. And what are the benefits of supplier development? If you take a well-established company, Company A, for example, what we would require from them is that from a supplier development point of view is that they must go and look at that particular area, scout it out and look what is it that they can locally procure or be able to locally obtain from that particular region. So if we're talking about the Port of Durban, I'll give an example again, I'll use the cranes. If we're saying we are manufacturing cranes and there's a big company that will be involved, we will specify that. I'll give it again and say maybe if the project is 100 million, we'll say of that 100 million, 30 million must be from the region of Durban, if those cranes are for Durban. And we'll specify that we'll want the nuts to be bought in the Port of Durban. The grease of those cranes must be procured from Durban. We'll specify what it is that is available within the Durban municipality, so that that particular tenderer is not just coming and exploiting within the Durban region, but Durban region also is able to get back from those opportunities. I think for us, that's also one of the biggest things that we are doing over and above the joint ventures that we are encouraging.
On our part as the Department of Trade and Industry, what we have done is we've seen the gap between manufacturers or business people understanding procurement value chains or procurement pipelines. Therefore, what we've done is we've gone to retail associations, we've spoken to state-owned enterprises. We've got a forum which we have termed the State-Owned Enterprise Procurement Forum that sits and looks at opportunities that can be set aside. Well, not using the term set aside, there could be quick wins for black industrialists to actually access without having to go through loops and hoops and the skipping and the jumping. Fostering those relationships, looking at your retail association, the first thing that we looked at is what is it that you are importing that we can be able to now configure, let's say a steel manufacturer that is that's making gates in the township, and that steel manufacturer can be able to now make gardening tools because they already know how to fabricate. So fostering those relationships has enabled us to understand what the market requires, because most of the time you find that you are in business, but the market doesn't require what you have. That is the reason why now you need to now architect your business to suit what now is required by the market. You need to understand what Transnet does and what Transnet needs. You need to understand if bottled water was, for example, if bottled water was bottled in bottles before, the world is moving towards plastic. You need to also transit with what the market demands.
Thanks for joining us for this special highlights package of the Essence Festival Durban Business Conference.